Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots Monday Morning, where we react to the Sunday morning news shows we watch so that you don't have to. I'm Katie Halper.
I'm Aaron Maté. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us. If you like the show, or whether or not you like it or not, if you're watching it, please like it. Come on. That's the price of admission. Please like it. Please share it. Also, our website, as always, is usefulidiotspodcast.com, where you can go to support the show and get bonus content. For this week's edition of Monday Morning, we're playing a little shorthanded. We're missing our producer, Matt Wilson. He is off in the wild this week.
Yeah.
And so, but we'll do our best, though.
We'll do our best. Yeah.
I think we can wing it for this week. Yeah.
Be patient if required, please.
But we are good for the regular show. We're going to be off this week. We're not going to have a regular show this week.
But it's great news for our non-subscribers. At least you get the full interview with none other than John Mearsheimer. And for our subscribers, just know you're in our hearts and minds, and you'll be getting back to bonus next week when we give you, as we always do, a Thursday throwdown and an extended interview.
Yes, our loyal paying subscribers, you're in our thoughts and prayers, basically. That's what we're offering you, thoughts and prayers. Just for 1 week. Just
for 1 week.
For 1 week. Yeah.
All righty. So should we get to our first clip, which is, of course, as always, MTP?
Good Sunday morning and happy St. Patrick's Day. In a week where Donald Trump officially became the presumptive Republican nominee for president, his threats of retribution are mounting, promising one of his first acts as president would be to free those charged and convicted for attacking the Capitol on January 6th, nearly 800 of whom have pled guilty to their crimes. On Ukraine, while he publicly says he supports a loan, he reportedly told Hungary's authoritarian leader in private he would cut off aid if reelected. And last night at a rally in Ohio, he said some undocumented immigrants aren't people.
If I had prisons that were teeming with MS-13 and all sorts of people that they've got to take care of for the next 50 years, right? Young people, they're in jail for years. And if you call them people, I don't know if you call them people. In some cases, they're not people, in my opinion.
And while addressing the audit.
That's just like throwing Biden I mean, it's just pathetic because I guess he's trying to throw red meat at the base. But you're just handing Biden talking points right there.
Yeah, he's reverting back to his standard bigotry, which is to completely dehumanize undocumented people in ways that, I mean, both parties accept a certain baseline dehumanization of undocumented people. I mean, look how they coalesced around draconian measures at the border recently. But Trump just takes it to a new level because that's his bread and butter.
Right. And Aaron, if you want me to pause anything, just say pause.
Auto industry, the former president made this ominous comment.
We're going to put a 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line, and you're not going to be able to sell those cars. If I get elected, now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole, that's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it. But they're not going to sell those cars.
The Trump campaign tried to clarify, saying he was talking about the auto industry. But the Biden campaign seized on the comment, saying Mr. Trump is doubling down on his threats of political violence. At the same time,
on that one, you have to, say that this is unfortunately Trump making one of these offhand comments that then gets blown out of way of proportion.
Right.
In that case, because yes, he was talking about the auto industry, but now, of course, his opponents like MSNBC, they're all saying, "Oh my God, he's calling for a bloodbath.
Right.
He's endorsing violence if he loses." Much like when he made a joke about Russia finding Hillary Clinton's missing emails, and everyone was like, "That's smoking gun of collusion, treason, put him in prison." We're still doing this 8 years later.
I mean, you have a lot to work with. Like he just called undocumented people barely people. I don't think you need to pretend that and of course he left himself open by using the term bloodbath, but what he's doing here is, this is just a reference to the fact that China can make cars China's like opening up companies in Mexico and then selling them as made in Mexico cars and not having to pay tariffs. And he doesn't want that. So,
That's kind of like with, under these so-called free trade rules that Bill Clinton pushed through. The U.S. could ship jobs to Mexico ship car production, for example, to Mexico.
Yeah, exactly.
Have most of the cars being assembled in Mexico, have like one part added in the US, and they could say, well, look, it's made in America. You know?
Right. And China's basically trying to do what America's doing.
Yeah.
And he doesn't want that.
Yeah.
Trump's
I'm always
delayed
impressed,
tax-
Katie.
Yeah.
I'm always impressed when we can talk economics. You know, it's not
I know.
not either of our forte, but look, I think we nailed that one right
We
there.
just nailed it. Yeah. Yeah. You're welcome, everyone. Your one-stop shop, pop culture, some weather, some econ, some every now and then some hair analysis, sartorial analysis. Yeah.
I read 2 pages of Capital by Marx. I read those 2 pages.
I read even more. Yeah.
You did? Really?
Yeah. Not to brag that I read more than 2 pages. Yeah.
I didn't understand a word of it, but yeah.
Well, it would have helped if you weren't reading the original German, but next time you can do it in English.
Damn.
With the legal system seem to be working for now. The New York hush money case, scheduled to begin next week, now delayed for 30 days, giving the defense more time to review documents. And in Georgia, the election interference case, the lead prosecutor, Nathan Wade, resigned Friday. Wade was scheduled to appear on this broadcast today, but canceled last minute, citing a family emergency. There's one place Trump didn't get a break: his own Vice President, Mike Pence, whose life was threatened on January 6th, who said this Friday.
Donald Trump is pursuing and articulating an agenda that is at odds with the conservative agenda that we governed on during our 4 years. And that's why I cannot, in good conscience, endorse Donald Trump.
Joining me now, Republican Senator Bill.
All right. Well, there you have it. Mike Pence,
MP.
Yeah. Cannot in his heart support the president he served for 4 years.
Right.
Oddly never resigned while he was by Donald Trump's side.
Right.
But now can't do it. I mean, in fairness to him, there was the whole January 6th thing where, you know, people were chanting hang Mike Pence, and that's probably not a very pleasant thing to go through.
Right. That'll do it. In fact, I think he's the only guy who gets a pass for changing his mind on that. Because everyone on Trump, because everyone else, they're like, once they get out of the administration, they write these tell-alls and they say they can't believe Trump was the way he is. Say what you will about Trump, he doesn't hide who he is.
No, he does not. And with Pence, he also doesn't hide who he is. So Pence is proud of their policy record while they're in office. Like, he loves the tax cuts for the ultra wealthy. He loves the, appointing more Supreme Court justices who could overturn Roe v. Wade. He's all about that, but he just doesn't like the style.
Right.
And, I guess in that respect, you can't blame him.
Chanting. Yeah, you can't blame him. Yeah.
All right. Well, another controversial leader is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And this week, there was what seemed to be a huge shakeup in Washington, where Chuck Schumer, longtime supporter of the Israeli government, stood up on the Senate floor and basically called for Netanyahu's removal. And this was deemed to be the seismic shift in U.S. policy that, wow, the U.S. was standing up to Netanyahu finally. But if you listen closely to what Schumer said, he was very clear to present his call for a new government in Israel as being in the service of Israel's interests. And he made sure to stress that there should be a new election in Israel only after it finishes its mass murder campaign in Gaza. So he was not saying this mass murder campaign has to stop. He was saying once it stops, once it's over, then Israel should have new elections. Right. The reason why, it's obvious. For a long time, the U.S. has always preferred, these Israeli leaders like Ehud Barak, who pretend to care about peace with Palestinians, while meanwhile pursuing the exact same policies as Netanyahu, stealing their land and killing them. But Netanyahu just makes it difficult because he's so openly racist, and his allies are so openly racist, and he's so openly honest about how we'll never have a Palestinian state.
Right, exactly. Yeah, he makes it plain what other Israeli leaders just do behind the scenes or do through their policy, but he says he doesn't want a two-state solution, and there'll never be one. But Aaron, I just wanted to share a little bit of a headline to give people insights in case they were wondering what on earth could be causing this change in rhetoric from. So here we have a headline. Angry and anxious, President Biden shouts and swears at aides after being told his poll numbers have gone down over handling of Israel, quote, Israel-Hamas conflict, which I refuse to call it an Israel-Hamas conflict. I mean, I would prefer Israeli genocide, but at the very least, call it Israel-Palestine. So.
Yeah, and so that was a report, I think, from NBC News that basically once he got his poll numbers in swing states, including Michigan, he was really upset because, yes, the uncommitted movement struck a serious blow to Biden because they mobilized people around the issue of support for genocide, and people turned out. tens of thousands of people turned out to say that they're uncommitted. And so I totally agree. That's why we're seeing the shift now. I don't think Chuck Schumer would have gotten up and said what he said if not for the uncommitted movement.
Agreed. 100%. No change in heart. So let's hear this this exchange, which is with Dana Bash and
about
Bibi
what happened
Netanyahu
here in the U.S.
First of all, look at his coloring there. Is he going through liver failure or something? He looks very jaundiced, very yellow, kind of green.
Let's talk about what happened here in the U.S. this week. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer gave a pivotal speech and said, "You have lost your way," and called you an obstacle to peace. Take a listen.
The Netanyahu coalition no longer fits the needs of Israel after October 7th. And I believe that holding a new election, once the war starts to wind down, would give Israelis an opportunity to express their vision for the post-war future.
Even saying the phrase "once the war starts to wind down," what he means is once the mass murder of a besieged death camp and the civilian trapped there, once that winds down, which is just such an offensive term. And I saw Norman Finkelstein speak on Saturday night
at like 11:30 p.m. Right?
Yeah, he went on late. He was part of a series at the Brooklyn Library, and so they had him on 11:30. But it was a packed house.
I heard that. Yeah, I was out of the state, or I would have been there.
People couldn't get in. It was crazy. But because this was after Norman Finkelstein took part in a debate last week along with Mourning Rubani. They debated Benny Morris, the Israeli historian, and that guy who calls himself Destiny. For some reason, Destiny was there. I don't know why. Anyway, so
oh my God, that was so embarrassing.
It was a great debate, and people were just really excited to see Norman speaking. So one of the things Norman said was that in Schumer's address, he said that Netanyahu and the far right are an obstacle to peace. And Norman pointed out, well, Netanyahu and the far right, that's basically Israel. There's no one else in Israel. I mean, Israel is the far right. Like no matter what political party in the mainstream you identify with, you are the far right. They're all far right. So there's no one left.
And people, I mean, poll after poll shows that even when they're critical of Netanyahu, and we'll get into those numbers in a second, but even when they're critical of Netanyahu, they support the war on Hamas.
Yes.
I mean, it's absolutely disgusting. I don't want to say, I mean, the war on Hamas, the genociding of Palestinians. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Chuck Schumer is the highest ranking Jewish elected official here in America, a staunch supporter of Israel. What's your response?
I think what he said is totally inappropriate. It's inappropriate to go to a sister democracy and try to replace the elected leadership there. That's something that the Israeli public does on its own, and we're not a banana republic. I think the only government that we should be working on to bring...
Let's evaluate that term. We're not a banana republic. You're a ethno-supremacist fanatic state committing genocide, which actually, I don't know, that kind of fits. And like, you're completely dependent on U.S. support. Like without U.S. weaponry and diplomatic cover, you couldn't carry out what you're doing, which is similar to all these client regimes that the U.S. has supported and propped up around the world. So I think actually Israel is a banana republic. And regardless, what's funny there too, he says, you don't go to a sister democracy and overthrow the government. And that's true. I mean, generally the U.S. only overthrows governments that it's not allied with. So this is, but again, like, what is the condition here that Schumer laid out? It's after the mass murder is over. Then you have new elections.
Right.
So he's actually endorsing Netanyahu's current mass murder campaign. Exactly.
I mean, the thing about this is that I can just hear like Biden defenders saying, look, now Biden, now you can't be mad. Now you have to vote for Biden. You can't be mad at Biden because look, what did you want? You want him to be hard on Netanyahu, and now he's being hard on Netanyahu. You know what I mean? It's a meaning. It makes it's not real a policy distinction. It's a PR move. It's not a change in policy, I should say. Yeah.
Down now is the terrorist tyranny in Gaza, the Hamas tyranny that murdered over 1,000 Israelis, including some dozens of Americans, and is holding Americans and Israelis hostage. That's what we should be focused on. And as far as what Senator Schumer said, the majority of Israelis support our governments. 82% of Americans support Israel instead of Hamas, but the majority of Israelis support the policies that we're leading.
It's true, but they don't support Netanyahu. In fact, the numbers on him are, I believe, I think he's at 15%. Think he's appropriate. And the numbers for the national unity leader, Benny Gantz, is much higher. So, yeah.
Yeah, but he is right there in saying that the majority of the public does support his policies, and so does Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden.
Right, exactly.
They just want to pretend as if this is about Netanyahu personally and not about the Israeli state, because no matter who replaces him, if that happens, they'll have the exact same policies of apartheid.
Right.
Go into Rafah, destroy the remaining Hamas terrorist battalions, make sure that we don't put into Gaza, instead of Hamas, the Palestinian Authority that educates their children towards terrorism and the annihilation of Israel.
So wait, no Hamas and no Palestinian Authority. So what's going to be there?
Yeah, he just wants somebody who's even more of a collaborator than the Palestinian Authority, which is hard to imagine because they are collaborators with Israel. But for Netanyahu, I guess right now they're not even good enough. They're not even compliant enough, subservient enough, which is a scary thought. And by the way, you want to talk about who teaches their kids terrorism. Look at what happens in Israeli schools. Look at the videos that have been put out of children singing songs about exterminating the people of Gaza. I mean,
yeah. And look at that high school teacher who got slammed, and there was almost a riot against him because he said something remotely sympathetic to Palestinians.
Yep, exactly. And the Palestinian professor who was just recently suspended I believe she was at Hebrew University because she spoke out against the genocide. She's Palestinian. Shalhub Kevorkian, who she was recently suspended from Hebrew University's Faculty of Law. Nadira Shalhub Kevorkian. Anyway, it's just there's a million examples of this. So Netanyahu is totally projecting when he talks about teaching terrorism.
Right.
And also an enormous majority here, including 99 Knesset members to 9, oppose the idea of ramming down a Palestinian state down our throats.
I want to get to some
the
of those
majority of
polls
Israelis. This is a wake-up call to Senator Schumer. The majority of Israelis support the policies of my government. Okay. It's not a fringe government. It represents the policies supported by the majority of the people. If Senator Schumer opposes these policies, he's not opposing me. He's opposing the people of Israel.
And there's truth to that, actually. There is.
There is. I know. That's what's so sad and scary about it. Yeah. By the way, I just got to correct something. Someone in the comments, the reason why people are anti-Semitic is because the Jews support Israel and genocide. You never want to say the followed by a group of people. Maybe with Nazi Germany, the Germans, the Nazis. But I've said this a couple times. There are lots of Jews who don't support Israel. In fact, one of the major groups at the forefront of what we're seeing right now in terms of protests is Jewish Voice for Peace. And also, if not now. Now, of course, I'm not claiming that they get all the credit. I mean, there are countless Palestinians who are risking their reputations here to call out the genocide, and Palestinians risking their lives and being slaughtered in Israel. But it's pretty ignorant to say that. So let's not say that. And I have to say this too. I hate, 99% of the time when people say that something's anti-Semitism, it's really just anti-Israel, but there is anti-Semitism. It's just not it's just being weaponized by people like the ADL. And that's my point. Yeah.
All right.
Intelligence community.
We're going to hear now Dana Bash kind of push back on Netanyahu, I guess, but in that Dana Bash way of still propping up every single Israeli talking point.
And when you've kind of, I got to say also, it's not that he's totally lost her, but when you're getting even remote pushback from Dana Bash, who's a major Zionist, it's an interesting sign.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. intelligence community warned that, quote, distrust of Netanyahu's ability to rule has deepened and broadened across the public. And then back to the polls, you're talking about support for the idea of toppling Hamas. That makes perfect sense. There were other polls in Israel, 3 major.
So again, to be CNN anchor, you have to go out of your way to pledge your loyalty to Israeli talking points. So everybody takes for granted that Hamas has to go. Nobody would ever say that the Israeli government that's massacred tens of thousands of people, destroyed Gaza, openly advocates ethnic cleansing, is led by the most like openly racist people in the world. There's no one would ever say that toppling them, overthrowing them is a legitimate goal. Like a CNN anchor like wouldn't say that. So it's like you can call for Hamas's ouster. You can never say your government, which commits mass murder, has to go.
Right. Exactly.
And again, and that government extends far beyond Netanyahu. It's not just like he's not the, he has the support of a far right coalition, yes, but again, he also has so-called liberals serving in his cabinet who support his policies.
Yeah,
or carrying them out.
Israeli television stations that said what Israelis also support are early elections. That's what I really want to focus on here is Senator Schumer not calling to sort of topple the government, but specifically says when the war winds down, will you commit to calling new elections? That's my question. Will you?
Dana, 2/3. First of all, what you said is wrong. The vast majority of Israelis oppose early elections until the war doesn't end.
Okay, I like that Freudian slip. Until the war doesn't end. Okay, what do you really think, BB?
Just had many polls on that. Look, a lot of the polls are twisted.
Channel 12 says 64% of Israelis support early elections.
But all polls show that's not. No, I'm afraid they asked them the question, do you support it during the war? And they said no.
But that's not what Schumer is calling for. He's calling for new elections when the war winds down.
See, again, it's like this thing is you can carry out the extermination of a people, but after you do that, then will you commit to having elections? Like that's the debate right now.
Yeah.
So mass murder is fine. Just will you have elections a bit earlier than planned?
Right. And then again, who's going to replace him? Benny Gantz, who bragged in a campaign ad that he returned parts of Gaza to the Stone Ages.
Well, we'll see when we win the war. And until we win the war, I think Israelis understand that if we were to have elections now, before the war is won, resoundingly won, we would have at least 6 months of national paralysis, which means we would lose the war. If we don't win the war, we lose the war. And that would be not only a defeat for Israel, but a defeat for America too.
Here we go.
Because our victory is your victory. We're fighting these barbarians that are not merely threatening the survival of Israel.
When the war winds.
So he's making another accurate point there, which is that his genocide is America's genocide too.
Right.
Because it couldn't happen without U.S. support. And he's trying to remind his patrons of that. And they're on board with that. Again, Schumer's on board with that. Schumer wants the genocide to continue. He just wants new elections afterwards.
Yeah, he just wants a rebrand.
Yeah.
Really. He wants a rebrand. He wants it to look like he's responding to the people who are critical of the U.S.'s complicity in this genocide.
Right.
And nothing he's calling for will have any effect on that.
Mm-hmm.
It's pure optics.
And by the way, who else says, your fight is our fight, your war is our your war is our war? Zelensky and the Ukrainian government.
Right.
And, so we have two horrible, I can't even call it what Israel's doing a war.
Right.
But we have one mass murder campaign going on in Gaza and one proxy war going on in Ukraine. And both are, causing unprecedented carnage. But what they share is that in both cases, the U.S. is on the side of ultra-nationalist supremacists. In the case of Israel, it's Netanyahu and his whole coalition. In the case of Ukraine, there is a neo-Nazi contingent inside the armed forces and inside Ukrainian society that aren't very popular politically, but have a very influential role. And that's who the U.S. has been on board with since 2014, when they helped when the U.S. helped put them in power. So it's just ethno-supremacy everywhere, and accordingly, carnage. And the only issue for the U.S. is like who gets to carry out the policy of carnage, not whether or not the carnage should continue.
Exactly. And also, in order to communicate this claim that their war is our war, in both cases, they have to commit this major historical kind of malpractice where they pretend that Hamas is ISIS. They say this explicitly, and Putin is Hitler.
Yes. Oh, yes. And anybody advocating negotiations is Neville Chamberlain.
Exactly right. Yeah. Capitulating and right.
Down.
Everything that we hold dear together.
Will you commit to new elections when
I
the
think
war
that's
winds
something
down?
for the Israeli public to decide. But it's not something. No, look, that's something for the Israeli people to decide. I think it's ridiculous to talk about it. It's like after 9/11, you know, after 9/11, you're in the midst of fighting the war against Al Qaeda, and an Israeli would say, you know, what we need now is either new elections in the U.S. or if your system doesn't.
I would have loved that.
Yeah, that'd been great. That'd been great. You know, what Netanyahu did after 9/11 is he came to Congress and testified, swore under oath that if the U.S. overthrew Saddam Hussein, the Middle East would be a peaceful place.
Right.
So that was his contribution to the post 9/11 climate, is to encourage more disasters. So
Right.
we definitely
Yeah.
don't need his advice on anything.
I mean, every time people bring up 9/11, I'm like, yeah, this is a great point, which is that both of those wars were absolute failures that caused a lot of bloodshed and left the world worse off than it was then, in the case of Afghanistan and Iraq.
Exactly.
Allowed, then President Bush should resign and we should have an alternative leader. You don't do that.
Well,
You
let's
don't
talk
do
about
that to
why.
a sister democracy, to an ally. You don't talk about that. What you do talk about is how do we help you defeat what President Biden called sheer evil. You don't just stop after you destroyed 80% of sheer evil. You destroy 100% of sheer evil to allow a
Mr. Prime
different
Minister,
future for
I want to
Israelis
talk
and
about why.
And this underscores just what a monstrous act it was for Biden to give this guy what, you know, Biden people call the bear hug. That was their policy.
Right.
After October 7th, is to give a bear hug to Netanyahu and give him everything he needed. And now, of course, that they've seen the results. He's just like on a killing spree with no regard for civilian life, actually out to destroy civilian life in Gaza. Finally, now, because of bad polling in the U.S., people revolting, they're getting jittery, but they've enabled this monster. He's right. It is their fight too.
Right.
And so understandably he feels betrayed because they've had his back all along and they're continuing to have his back.
Right.
So the policy doesn't make sense. Either you support what he's actually doing or not. If you don't, then you should say you should stop the genocide. It's not about calling for early elections after the genocide is over.
You know what they should call this genocide? They should call it Sister Act.
Yes. Well, it is. It is. And he talks about a sister. You don't do this to a sister democracy. Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to have to suffer through one more
really sorry, guys.
Netanyahu clip. He is the hardest person I find to listen to.
Yeah.
Because he's just so disingenuous and racist. But he is, of course, as he says, our ally. So let me just get that clip. Bear with me.
And by the way, while you're doing that, someone put in the comments, Americans are lazy. They use Jew and Zionist interchangeably. Yeah, that we got to get that out of people's brains because, again, Israel and the ADL and AIPAC want you to think that Jewish and Zionists are the same, as well as anti-Semites, and that's not true. So we cannot let that point be articulated.
Organizations call what they are seeing near famine in Gaza. So why won't you allow more food trucks to drive through the border crossings into Gaza to feed starving civilians while you continue to take out the terrorists in Hamas?
Well, our policy is to do exactly that. And in fact, we've enabled, our policy is to not to have famine, but to have the entry of humanitarian support as needed and as much as is needed. So we've created alternative routes, supply routes. We allow the dropping of the support from the air, humanitarian aid, a sea route that we've cooperated with, and it started yesterday, and alternative land routes that we're enabling again. The problem isn't getting the trucks in. The problem is that once they're getting in, they're looted by Hamas or looted by gangs. And what we're trying to do with some other powers is to try to get the aid to the actual civilians who need them and not looted by Hamas. That's really the problem.
Well,
in any case, that's our policy, and that's why I've enabled alternative routes of supply.
Okay. There's been a trickle, I mean, to be fair, of supply going in there. And every major NGO, outside organization involved with this crisis says that the level of hunger is life-threatening for hundreds of thousands. Cindy McCain who the McCain family, they have been long supporters of Israel. She is now the executive director of the World Food Program. She said that hunger has reached catastrophic levels in northern Gaza. People are dying. Only a fraction of the food needed is trickling. To prevent an outright famine, they need significant increase in humanitarian aid now. Millions of lives are at stake.
Yes, even a warmonger like Cindy McCain, who has always backed Israel, along with her late husband, John McCain, even she is horrified. But of course, that took a revolt among her staff to get her there, because initially she was actually attending public events honoring Israeli officials. And then she faced an internal revolt over that. And so now she's finally saying some words. But yeah, I mean, that's how dire it is that even the most fanatic supporters of Israel, some of them are being forced to acknowledge reality.
Right. Netanyahu really looks unwell, like he's covered in slime. Remember slime from when we were kids?
I do remember slime. I mean, you know,
kind of green color,
like from Ghostbusters, or or the game show. I don't know if you had this. Double Dare.
Yeah, Double Dare. Yeah,
there we
exactly.
Go. Yeah.
Slime was just a big part of our youth. Yeah.
Yes. I never thought about that before.
Yeah.
Like what impact did that have on us psychologically, having so much slime? But anyway, for another time.
Maybe it prepared us to look at Netanyahu and
maybe it did.
Weird.
Maybe that's why we're here right now.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, slime. Thank you, slime. But no, he's just pure evil. I mean, I think that's what we're seeing. It's just he is pure evil.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's the embodiment of evil.
He really is. Yeah.
All right, well, let's hear Mr. Evil a little bit more.
Sorry, guys.
Will you commit to that?
Of course, and we're doing it. Again, I've authorized alternative routes of supply. And again, the problem is not the number of trucks going in, although we're increasing it on a daily basis. I think the problem is preventing the looting by Hamas and by others. And that's what we're working on now. I think it's a cooperative effort.
Such a lie. It's such a lie.
It's like their latest talking point.
Yeah. They made it impossible for aid groups to deliver aid. First of all, by blocking aid to begin with, so that there wasn't deliveries to make. But then even when some stuff did get in, then they attacked the police escorts that were escorting the aid, which then made those deliveries impossible. And then, of course, when some shipments did make it, they attack people constantly lining up to receive aid. But there's been we refer to the flower massacre, but now there's been multiple flower massacres. So you can't even say there's one, single flower massacre. There's multiple now.
No, that's the latest talking point. And I know because I have a family friend who's like always sending me Hasbara, and she's just sent me a video of alleged cans of food that were being sold by Hamas. I mean, first of all, it's a Palestinian market. Who knows when that was filmed from? It doesn't undo, even if it were real, it doesn't undo what Israel is doing. And then she said the problem isn't Israel or America, it's Hamas. So this is like their latest talking point.
All right, what do you think? Is that enough of Netanyahu?
Probably.
Okay. Yeah. All right. We're going to turn now to John Kirby, the White House spokesperson.
From one ghoul to another.
Yeah, fan favorite. It's been his job from the start to spin the White House policy to pretend as if the White House is holding Israel to account, all while justifying its mass murder and doing absolutely nothing to stop it and everything to facilitate it. So anyway, here is John Kirby.
The president wants a temporary ceasefire, a Palestinian state, a two-state solution, a peace agreement, and has asked Netanyahu not to move into Rafah. He has defied all that. So what more can you do?
Well, they haven't moved into Rafah yet.
They've said,
great.
Martha, you know the answer to your question. What more can you do? It's not some mystery. You can cut off the military and diplomatic support.
Right.
And you should be asking, why aren't you doing that? If you claim to be so uncomfortable with all these horrific actions by Israel, why aren't you doing that?
Right. Yeah.
they have their war plans.
They have. We've not seen those plans. And as we've said before, Martha, we would not support such an operation unless or until they can accommodate the 1.5 million refugees that are there and preserve their safety and security. We have continued. And
the problem with John Kirby saying that, like, you know, first of all, Israel doesn't have the right to do anything in Gaza to begin with. Right. It's an occupying power. It doesn't have the right to fire a single bullet. But putting that aside, John Kirby said before, he's defended Israel's actions, saying that they have plans in place to protect civilians. In fact, he said they're doing more to protect civilians than even we would. Right.
Right.
So
that was
he's
so embarrassing.
So he's not a credible voice in saying that, yeah, like we would let Israel assault Rafah if they have a credible plan, because previously he said that Israel does have credible plans while it's committing mass murder. And remember, like the little grid map they had of like safe zones.
Yeah.
Where, you know, which like they dropped on Gaza, and Gazans who managed to have an internet connection could look at. And of course, it tells you to go somewhere and you get bombed anyway as you go. So it's all just complete theater. It's all PR. So he has no credibility at all when he talks about like plans to protect civilians, because he was whitewashing Israel's fake attempts to say they protected civilians while they were killing them from the start.
Yeah. Absolutely disgusting.
And we'll continue to press the Israelis to do more to reduce civilian casualties, to do more to get more trucks in, and to, again, help us come to closure on this temporary ceasefire so that we can get all those hostages out.
Come to closure? What is this? Like some healing ritual? Like there's a romantic relationship? What are you talking about?
Come to closure.
As you mentioned, the Israeli War Cabinet approved its plan for Rafah. You said you haven't seen it, but President Biden at one point said that was a red line for him, and then kind of walked that back. He said it's a red line, it's not a red line. What is it?
That's a good question, because last week Biden was asked, you know, do you have a red line for Israel? And he said that going into Rafah without a plan to protect civilians, that's a red line. But then he immediately said, but I'm not going to cut off aid to Israel.
Right.
I'm not going to cut off military support to Israel if they do that. So basically, there is no actual red line. There's none. There's absolutely none. And
it's like a smear, not a line. It's a smear, and it doesn't have any effect.
Exactly.
It's no different.
If they go in the same way they've been going in other places, if they don't move those refugees, and I don't know where they'd move them.
Well, again,
well, what is she saying there? And I don't know where they'd move them. I mean, they could, of course. They shouldn't be making any refugees in the first place. But they could always, you know, within the horrific thing that they're doing, let civilians out of Gaza, have humanitarian corridors. It's just a crazy, that premise is like penning people in is never questioned as a premise. Just keeping them caged while you slaughter them.
Yeah, and Israel's original plan was to ethnically cleanse them into Egypt.
Right.
They really wanted that at first, which has been difficult, but I think they're still holding on to that goal.
Yeah.
I don't want to get ahead of where we are.
Look at him with his celebrating St. Patty's Day with his stupid clover. I mean, there's nothing wrong with St. Patty's Day or clover, but it's just so like you're celebrating a holiday while overseeing and condoning and coordinating this genocide. It just
and the Irish have a strong tradition of supporting Palestine, and
true.
You know, people like Claire Daly, the Irish member of the European Parliament, just denounced Biden and said, you know, we don't consider, you know, basically, how dare you invoke your Irish ancestry, as Biden likes to do.
Right.
Because like we renounce you, you know.
Right, because they have such an understanding of colonialism.
They haven't moved into Rafah. I would just reiterate what the president has said many times. We would not support such an operation unless or until they've got a credible, executable plan to take care of the 1.5 million refugees that have been pushed into Rafah because of operations in Khan Yunis to the north and Gaza City even further to the north. Now,
what's his point? Like, why is he mentioning that? Is that supposed to be exonerating? Yeah.
He said, look, I can name some places in Gaza.
Exactly.
I know the name Khan Yunis.
Yeah.
You know, I know Gaza City. So look, I'm so on top of everything. This is why we're doing great.
Yeah, it's just filler words.
Yeah.
Like why he's just pointing out that, because of what Israel has already done, that's why they're refugees. Like if he had any awareness, he'd realize that he's actually indicting Israel, as he should be. And someone pointed out in the comments that the Irish are already also starved.
Absolutely.
Which is just another thing that they understand.
The famine,
Defense forces say that they have such a plan for an evacuation. They talked about humanitarian islands in Gaza. Again, we'd welcome the opportunity to see that, to see if that's actually executable and doable.
And give us the status on that floating.
We welcome the opportunity to see if the ethnic cleansing plan is executable and doable. That's what John Kirby said.
Thanks, Kirby. Thanks, John.
Dock and how long you think that might take, and how they do it without putting boots on the ground at all, connecting it somehow.
In Pentagonese, this is called JLOTS, Joint Logistics Over the Shore. It's a temporary pier, a floating dock.
It's a temporary pier in Pentagon leaves. It's J-Lots. I love. I don't know why
I love he's like cracking himself up.
Yeah, like why am I so giddy as I'm saying this? I don't know, but I just have a great time saying J-Lots. He really should have been a game show host. That really was his calling.
He missed it. Yeah.
Yeah. Not
like if Hitler had been an artist, the world would have been a better place.
There we go.
If Kirby had been a game show host, the world would have been a better place. Yeah.
J-Lots. Watch this. This is a really revealing answer because he's going to reveal how long it's going to take to build Biden's pier off Gaza, which Biden presented in his State of the Union speech is the magic solution. We're going to get aid into Gaza, but with one snag. How long will it take to build, John Kirby?
If you will, that is transported in pieces. The first pieces of it are on the way now. They left Norfolk just a little bit earlier this week. It's going to probably take about 6 to 8 weeks or so for all the pieces to get in place and for it to become operational.
Oh, 6 to 8 weeks. Okay, so meanwhile, people are starving, and the pier that will facilitate a trickle of aid into Gaza is going to take 6 to 8 weeks. Well, what happens to
how
all the
many people will be killed?
Yeah, in the next 6 to 8 weeks. And of course, if you're saying 6 to 8 weeks, that probably means like, I don't know. The actual reality is probably double that or even more. Who knows? But regardless, even if it is 6 to 8 weeks, how many people will die of starvation and deprivation in the meantime? You know, like, can we consider that for a second? And again, it comes down to Israel is blocking thousands of trucks from entering Gaza in the most sadistic ways, you know, not allowing so many just vital pieces of aid to come in on the grounds that could be used for terrorism, which is just such a sadistic joke. But the U.S. lets them get away with it.
So gross.
We are working with partners in the region to figure out the details of how the material will be secured on and off the floating dock, and of course, how it will be distributed inside Gaza.
Great. So good luck figuring that out, and how many people will die as you do. You know?
Look at his face there. That's perfect expression. Yeah, it's always a good sign when your like plans to help people sound like some weird kids like entertainment system. Floating docks.
Okay.
And thank you, Claude, for your generous super chat.
All right. Well, meanwhile, there's another conflict going on, and that is the proxy war in Ukraine. And let's hear Kirby on that.
I have to thank Wadesworth also for his very generous super chat.
Move to Ukraine. House Speaker Mike Johnson says he expects to pass Ukraine aid with support from Democrats as a standalone bill or combined with aid to Israel. Did the president speak directly with Speaker Johnson about this, and how does he feel about it?
Yeah, this is actually really important. Speaker Mike Johnson, who's been holding up this new money for Ukraine in this so-called foreign aid bill, which is $61 billion for the proxy war in Ukraine, $14 billion for Israel. Now Mike Johnson's saying, he's indicating at least, that they're going to pass the Ukraine money just separately from Israel.
Right.
So he's saying rather than have it as a package deal, we're going to pass them separately. And it would pass if it came up for a vote because all the Democrats, including the squad, support the proxy war in Ukraine, even though it's been a complete disaster, primarily for Ukraine, but really for the entire world. And then, of course, many Republicans do too. So together, they'll be able to pass it. And Mike Johnson has apparently caved to the pressure he faced to put it up for a vote. And that's a lesson in how neocons always win. Because even though a majority of Republican voters, according to polls, oppose more money for the Ukraine proxy war, Mike Johnson's been under unprecedented pressure from members of his own, like Mitch McConnell and Joe Biden, and the neocon establishment always wins. So as I anticipated, I do think that this money will eventually be approved. I do think Johnson will cave, as he's indicating he will.
Well, he's already spoken to Speaker Johnson now a couple of times.
Specifically about that.
But I don't know of any conversations that the president has had. I know that we have been in touch. The White House has been in touch with Speaker Johnson and his team about this moving forward. Look, time is of the essence. And you were in Ukraine not long ago. They are running out of ammunition.
Yeah, she was embedded with the neo-Nazis, right?
Yes, we covered this where she was embedded with something called the 3rd Assault Brigade. That's what they're called now. But in reality, in real life, they're the Azov Battalion. Which is a neo-Nazi paramilitary formation, which actually, under U.S. law, is banned from receiving U.S. assistance. But we're supposed to forget about that now because things have changed since Russia invaded in February 2022. And so Martha Raddatz embedded with them.
They read White Fragility.
There we go.
By Rob D'Angelo, yeah.
Donbass. And they are falling back now on second and third lines of defense as the Russians continue to try to push west. They've got to have this support, and we need it now.
Do you worry at all about our own readiness as we give weapons to Ukraine? Has that been an issue?
Oh, of course. But since the beginning of the war, we've had to, with every package we provided, we've got to make a certification that it's not going to damage our own national security. And as we have given more and depleted our inventories, we have been doing everything we can to work with the defense industry to restock, to replenish. That's what this replenishment authority, why that's so important. So, yes, it's a concern. We haven't reached a point yet where our own national security and our own operational plans have been jeopardized. But it's absolutely something you can't ever take your eye off.
Yes, they are working with the defense industry by giving them tens of billions of dollars authorized under all these Ukraine proxy war funding bills to replenish their stocks and send off old U.S. stocks to Ukraine. And it's a great racket if you're in the military-industrial complex. For everybody else, it's a disaster. But if your money is in weapons, then, it's a good time for you.
Yeah, great time.
All right. Well, thank you, John Kirby.
I think we skipped 4, didn't we? Clip 4?
Yes, that was on purpose. That was on
got
purpose.
it.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, let's go to Senator Chris Van Hollen, who has emerged now as a critic of Israel. He oddly has voted for every single measure to fund Israel, but he is saying some things that are very critical now, including now pushing back on Israeli claims about UNRWA, the UN the UN Agency for Refugees.
This government funding debate happening in the next few days. Some Republicans want to cut off support for the UN agency UNRWA that supports about 6 million Palestinian refugees, Lebanon, Jordan, Gaza Strip, West Bank. You said last week, senators need to read the classified report prepared by the Director of National Intelligence about the Netanyahu government claims about that agency. You seem to be implying that the links to terror groups are unfounded.
Oh, there's no doubt that the claim that Prime Minister Netanyahu and others are making that somehow UNRWA is a proxy for Hamas are just flat out lies. That's a flat out lie. If you look at the person who's in charge of operations on the ground in Gaza for UNRWA, it's about a 20-year U.S. Army veteran. You can be sure he is not in cahoots with Hamas. Netanyahu has wanted to get rid of UNRWA since at least 2017. That's
really important point. And as we pointed out before on the show, this UNRWA reports, these claims came out the same day as the ICJ ruling.
Yeah. And months before, the Israeli Foreign Ministry put out a report saying that UNRWA cannot endure. They have to go. And the reason why is because UNRWA basically, it keeps Palestinians alive in Gaza. It helps society function. It employs people. It has so many schools. Yep. And in those schools, it helps preserve Palestinian culture and heritage. And for these fanatics inside Israel, that is considered a threat to their existence because their existence is predicated on supremacy and wiping out Palestinian national identity. So they've been trying to destroy UNRWA for a very long time. They came up with this fake claim about UNRWA staffers being complicit on October 7th. Joe Biden's administration rushed to embrace it without even looking at Israel's non-existent evidence.
Right.
And other countries who went along with Joe Biden by following orders, they've been forced to actually restore the funding because it was such a ridiculous scam.
It's the least they could do. I mean, it's pathetic that, and again, it was 0.002%. Even if it had been true, the claim was that 0.002% were involved. Yeah. And the fact that you would defund them based on that, well, you should definitely be defunding the IDF because they commit way more crimes.
I mean, like infinite. It's just like
it's not even comparable.
It's just
and it's all on video.
Yeah, and those crimes are actually real. Whereas the UNRWA claims, as Van Hollen is explaining, there's nothing to support Israel's claims.
Right. Absolutely terrible.
Not just in Gaza, but also in the other places you talked about. And if you get rid of UNRWA in Gaza today, it is the primary distribution system for food and aid. So if you cut off funding for UNRWA in Gaza entirely, it means more people will starve, more people won't get the medical assistance they need, and so it would be a huge mistake to cut them off.
That's what they want.
Can you explain why you believe that the Prime Minister is trying to dismantle UNRWA, which is the agency that has 13,000 people distributing aid? No one else has that kind of infrastructure in Gaza.
Well, that's exactly right. And there have been allegations made by the Netanyahu government that up to 14 of those 13,000 people were involved in the horrific October 7th attacks. We should investigate it. We should hold all those people accountable. But for goodness sakes, let's not hold 2 million innocent Palestinian civilians who are dying of starvation. Let's not hold them essentially accountable for the bad acts of 14 people. Netanyahu's wanted to get rid of UNRWA because he has seen them as a means to continue the hopes of the Palestinian people for a homeland of their own. Mm-hmm. And he has been opposed to a two-state solution. And this has been his primary objective, stopping a two-state solution.
Yeah, I mean, as we explained, it's more than that. He just UNRWA represents, and it preserves Palestinian national identity. It employs so many people, has so many vital pieces of So he explained it pretty well. He didn't fully get it, but again, better than pretty much anyone else in Congress on this. But unfortunately, Van Hollen voted for the most recent so-called foreign aid bill, giving Israel $14 billion to commit the very atrocities he's now opposing. So it's strange. And you know how he justified that? He said, well, because he needed the money for Ukraine. So congrats to Ukraine proxy warriors, especially the progressive ones, on putting us in a position where someone feels compelled to vote for Israel just to keep the Ukraine proxy war going. It's just another example of what siding with neocons, it leads to disastrous consequences, no matter what your initial intentions are.
Bloodshed for bloodshed. Also, Chuck Allen points out, makes an important point, UNRWA staffers were tortured by Israel. There are reports that happened.
Yes. Yes. Well, so the basis for Israel's allegations against UNRWA were interrogations of imprisoned Palestinians. And what does that mean, interrogations? It means torture, because that's what Israel does, as everyone knows. Okay, let's hear more from Chris Van Hollen.
Back in February, you pushed the Biden administration to craft what ended up being a national security memorandum that requires countries who receive U.S. weapons, all countries, to certify that they are in compliance with U.S. law and they are not blocking the delivery of humanitarian aid. Israel has until March 24th to turn in a letter. They reportedly did so. Are they in compliance?
No, they're not as of today. And you're right, this is a very important tool that the Biden administration's put forward. It applies to Israel and any other country that receives U.S. military assistance.
Will President Biden's administration say that they're not in compliance? Are you confident?
I hope they will, because President Biden himself has repeatedly said that the Netanyahu government is unnecessarily restricting desperately needed humanitarian assistance. I mean, the president has said it a number of times. He said no excuses. So it may be that the minister of defense in Israel signed this, but I cannot imagine a scenario right now where Secretary Blinken can find that promise is credible and reliable when the day it was signed. Clearly, the Netanyahu government is not in compliance, because we see that they're continuing to restrict humanitarian assistance.
Well, why?
I have confidence that Secretary Blinken will find a way to pretend that Israel is in compliance with this new U.S. rule that requires countries receiving U.S. military support to respect international law and allow aid. I'm confident that Blinken will find a way, because his job officially is to be a diplomat for the U.S. But really, what's his real job? It's to be a spokesperson for Israel. That's what he's been from the start.
And warmonger.
On the UNRWA allegations, he immediately embraced Israel's claims, even though he admitted he hadn't even looked at Israel's supposed evidence. But he called them
highly credible, right? Yeah. Disgusting.
Watch to see if Secretary Blinken affirms it or denies it, but what's the consequence here? I know you've said you don't want to cut off all military support for Israel. You're talking about offensive weapons.
Yes, this would not apply to the Iron Dome or any defensive systems, but it would say no more bombs for use in Gaza until you come into compliance. So it's not a total cutoff. I mean, the Netanyahu government can open their Reds Crossing to help starving people in northern Gaza. They can stop turning away maternity kits, claiming that somehow they pose a dual-use danger, that they could be used for military purposes. They could stop turning away water purifiers, because when they do that, they send the whole truck back for 4 weeks. So they need to allow more assistance in, and they need to really deal with that deconfliction issue. People need to be able to deliver assistance without getting killed.
I mean, his position is still lame. It's better, I guess, than nothing, but he's saying that, if we can certify that Israel is complying with the bare minimum of international law, so not blocking humanitarian aid, then we can send them more bombs to kill people.
Right. No, I know. What is he expecting they'll do with that?
You shouldn't send them bombs to begin with.
Right.
Like this policy of sending Israel bombs to kill people while also pressuring them to deliver more aid. Just the bombs should not be delivered, period. Because Israel's an occupying power committing mass murder. And that's the problem. It's like with these people, is they don't have the minimal courage just to say this is an occupying power. They want to pretend as if these are two sides fighting a war. And in a war of two sides, you have to respect the rules of war. But this is not a normal conflict. This is a genocidal occupier. And you don't have to call them that, but you have to at least acknowledge that they're an occupying power. And when you're an occupying power, you just don't have, it's not a normal conflict. And occupiers have obligations, not rights, including ending the occupation. Right. That's what he should be calling for, not just letting in aid, but ending the occupation.
Well, don't hold your breath for that, Aaron.
No, we will not. Okay. Well,
Shifty Schiff.
Schiff. Yeah, let's go to Shifty Schiff. Speaking of, we were talking earlier about how the Ukraine proxy war is very tied in with Israel's mass murder campaign, because both are neocon projects. And here's Adam Schiff, a Democratic Party neocon, with a helpful reminder of that.
Congressman, the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer rebuked Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his government the way that...
Guys, hold on. I just checked the likes. We're not even at half. If you haven't liked the stream already, give a thumbs up. Don't do it twice because that cancels it, but give a thumbs up. I know not half of you are hate watching.
They're prosecuting the war now after, of course, the deadly, horrific attack on October 7th.
Just side note, will Dana Bash ever call Israel murdering more than 13,000 children and thousands of other civilians, men and women? Will she ever call that horrific? No, It's only reserved for October 7th.
Right. Awful.
He says that it's time for new elections in Israel. I'm sure you heard the prime minister on the show a short while ago rejecting the idea that he would commit to such elections. Where do you stand on this?
Well, first of all, I want to highlight that Chuck Schumer laid the responsibility for this war exactly where it lies, and that is with Hamas terrorists that attacked and murdered and raped and tortured Israelis on October 7th and continues to hold hostages, continues in a cowardly way to use the Palestinian people as human shields.
Adam Schiff is supporting the Israeli policy of punishing, starving, and murdering the 2.2 million people of Gaza as punishment for what Hamas did.
Right.
So he's actually projecting there in terms of cowardice and cruelty. And again, it's the same framing. He forgets that there's an occupation going on, as if history just began on October 7th. And so therefore he can say all this is the fault of Hamas.
Right.
Whatever you think of October 7th, Hamas was responding to a military occupation.
Right.
And you can't mention that on TV.
I don't think he forgets there's an occupation. He's either in denial or just doesn't want to acknowledge it.
Yeah. Well, it's just never mentioned by any of these people.
Of course not. Of course not.
Even critics of Israel,
right?
Like Von Hollen. It's just
right.
It's something you just can't mention.
Can't mention facts on the ground.
And remember when Nina Turner mentioned recently on CNN, the panel had a meltdown.
Yeah. Total meltdown.
Anderson Cooper was like crying in tears because Nina Turner dared talk about the basic realities of this issue. But anyway, back to Schiff.
Hamas terrorists hiding behind women and children in Gaza. So
they love that talking point that they hide behind civilians. They love that.
Responsibility lies with Hamas. But I also agree with Leader Schumer's comments regarding the necessity of reducing civilian casualties in Gaza. And we are holding Israel to a high standard because we share not only national security interests with Israel, but also share our values with Israel.
Really?
Correct.
High standards?
Correct. And we do share our values. We're both European settler colonies.
Right.
Bent on exterminating or displacing the indigenous population and dominating the Middle East. Right. So yes, those are the values. And again, notice what he says our goal is. He says our goal there is to not stop civilian casualties. He said it's to reduce them.
Right.
So for Adam Schiff, it's like you're cooking. Like if you just reduce to a simmer, you can still maintain the killing the civilians. You have to reduce it. So you can still kill civilians, just kill a bit less of them. That's Adam Schiff's policy.
Right. And the idea that we're holding them to a high standard, I mean, what an absolute joke.
And while I wouldn't go as far as the leader in setting out the timing of elections, the fact that Israel's most staunch defender in the U.S. Congress, Chuck Schumer, should be making these remarks should be an earthquake in Israel. We are Israel's most important ally. We recognize Israel's right to defend itself, but we also recognize the need for a two-state solution. That ultimately is the way to not only resolve this conflict, but prevent future conflicts from taking place. So I think these remarks are incredibly important. And as I would not go as far as them, I also recognize the significance of them coming from this incredible champion. The only other thing I want to mention, Dana, is...
And just before we hear more from Schiff, again, this notion that the U.S. supports a two-state solution is a lie. The world's only opponents of a two-state solution are Israel and the U.S. because the U.S. has always backed Israel's insistence on keeping the major West Bank settlement blocks that make a two-state solution impossible.
Right.
Because they cut up the West Bank into little pieces, steal its most valuable resources, especially water, and keep these fanatic settlers living among Palestinians who have been there for multiple generations. And that's whether it's Netanyahu or it's like, the Labor Party under Ehud Barak and others, Yitzhak Rabin, it's all the same policy. Netanyahu is more brazen in saying, I'm not even going to pretend to support a two-state solution. And that's why they want somebody new who can pretend they care about a Palestinian state, even while both parties in both countries, whether it's Israel or the U.S., they're committed to making an actual Palestinian state impossible. And the Palestinian state that Palestinians have accepted is a huge compromise in itself, which is 22% of historic Palestine. The Palestinian leadership, including Hamas at a certain point, accepted that, a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza, which for them is a massive compromise. But the U.S. and Israel are both so fanatic and so bent on occupation and supremacy that even the Palestinian surrender of 22% of their land, that's not even enough for Israel and the U.S.
Also, as Gideon Levy, the great Israeli journalist who we've had on, has pointed out, anyone who's now for a two-state solution right now was against it when it was actually possible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And all the people who were for it when it was possible now know it's not viable.
Mm-hmm.
Is the major impediment right now to assisting Israel in its duty to defend itself is the Republican leadership in the House, which will not bring up an Israel aid bill, even as it won't bring up a Ukraine aid bill. And that has to change. We need to get that aid approved.
He didn't get the memo. He didn't get the memo that you're supposed to be changing your tune on this. He didn't get the Schiff didn't shift.
Thank God we have Democrats standing up for the right thing, which is urging Republicans to be even bigger warmongers.
Right.
Calling them out for stalling packages that will funnel billions of dollars more into Israel's mass murder campaign and the Ukraine proxy war. That's the Democratic Party. And will there be any progressives standing up to Adam Schiff on this? On Israel, a little bit, but on Ukraine, no. They're in total lockstep. And it's a great time to be a neocon, as always.
Well, Aaron, this brings up actually a super chat I want to read and highlight for you. Red Maiz says, why does Rashida support Western supremacy in Syria but not Palestine? She is an imperialist against everyone else but Palestine. That is not an ally.
Yeah, that's Rashida Tlaib. That's being referred to here. And, her totally, staunch support for Palestine. She's the only Palestinian member of Congress, and she's been censured for it, right? When she said from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. She got censured. While meanwhile, other members of Congress who call for mass murder openly, they're not censured. But yes, Rashida Tlaib on Syria takes Israel's side. She takes the side of the same, and this is just my opinion here. People, for Syria, people have, it's a very divisive topic, including among the Palestinian community, because there are people, of course, who have suffered under the Syrian government, and they support the regime change effort there. But I personally, my view is that we have no business regime changing any other country, and that the regime change campaign in Syria was a disaster, and it was carried out in part by Israel. Israel is on the side of arming the rebels, and Israel bombs Syria consistently, and Israel attacks ships bringing oil to Syria to try to reach the population, because the U.S. has imposed a crippling blockade and is occupying 1/3 of Syria and stealing its oil. And Rashida Tlaib, unfortunately, I think, takes the side of the same forces that are trying to exterminate her people. And I don't know why she does that. Maybe it's a political thing to to be so outspoken on Palestine. Right. You feel you need some cover by siding with neocons elsewhere. I don't know what the calculation is there. I think it's immoral and a huge political mistake. But that's unfortunately where a lot of progressives are at. That's why you have people calling me names a lot for the views I have about Syria. But that's just how it is, unfortunately. And
they call you an Assadist, you call them a sadist.
That's exactly right.
And thank you, Betsy Catherine Brown, for that. And nice middle name. It's my first name, spelled the same way.
Okay. All right. Well, we have time for one more clip, and we should cover what's been happening with TikTok, because last week the House had voted to ban TikTok, and the Senate is expected to follow suit. And the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Turner, who's a big promoter of this TikTok ban, he was
arming Ukraine to the teeth, right?
Yes, he was on ABC's This Week to discuss it.
And talk about your bill. That this is one area you defied Donald Trump on because he supports TikTok. That bill could potentially ban TikTok. You say it's a national security concern. I know you had that classified briefing. What can you tell us to make it more clear to Americans why this is a problem?
Sure. Well, Martha, I think we have to first start with that China as a country is not like us. It's an authoritarian regime that has self-identified as an adversary to the United States. It has banned Twitter.
Okay, no, actually, well, first of all, China is not self-identified as an adversary of the United States. The U.S. has identified China
right, of course,
as an adversary. Yeah, but that's the U.S. identifications. Like, you can't say it's like you can't identify someone as an adversary and then say that they identify themselves as an adversary. It's like that's
right.
I don't know what the term is for that, but it's not accurate. Like,
it's a lie. I believe the term is lie.
Yeah,
that you're looking for.
It's a lie, but I just wonder what the term is, like, if you were to assign someone the wrong identity, what the name is for that, whatever that is.
Mislabeling, misgendering. But yeah.
Misadversarying, basically.
Misadversarying, yeah.
Yeah.
Also, he says that China has banned Twitter. That's not true. They haven't banned these platforms. They just wanted the companies to follow certain rules they refuse to follow.
Yeah, and he calls them authoritarian while we're banning an app.
Right, yeah.
Sounds pretty authoritarian. And again, China obviously has some authoritarian qualities. Do we want to embody that now by banning this one of the most popular apps there is?
Yeah, of course. And we know a big part of that is because it's so has so much content critical of Israel.
Exactly.
It has banned Facebook. It has banned YouTube in China. It understands the power of social media and social media apps, and it certainly seeks in a number of illegal ways to obtain the data of Americans that it can use as part of its perpetration of this greater surveillance society that it uses to control its own population.
So he basically only wants American surveillance. He wants American companies to surveil Americans, not Chinese companies.
Yeah, and I mean, is China really interested in spying on young kids here in the U.S., like uploading dance videos? I don't know. It seems like they have better things to do, including surveilling their own population, which of course they do. But it strikes me they'd be more concerned about their internal situation rather than spying on young American kids. But maybe Mike Turner knows something we don't.
Right.
When President Xi stood next to President Putin in Russia, he openly stated to the world what his intentions were. He said that we, the two of them, are going to bring about change that hasn't happened in 100 years. That's the battle between authoritarianism and democracy, and that's certainly what we're seeing in China's both economic, its propaganda, and certainly its military buildup.
What Xi Jinping said actually is that the era of the unipolar world where the U.S.
Right.
runs everything, destroys countries with regime change, operations and sanctions and outright invasions, that's over, that they want to challenge that. And hegemons like Mike Turner see that as a threat.
Right.
And also, as you know, Jonathan Greenblatt of the Anti-Defamation League said openly, we have a TikTok problem.
Right.
Because,
Israel is a TikTok problem.
yeah, because the kids are being critical of Israel. And so all that is driving people like Mike Turner to want to ban it.
Right.
It is part of its self-declaration as an adversary of the United States.
Congressman, is there recent evidence that TikTok is sending a significant amount of data about Americans to China, to the Chinese government?
Well, you know, Martha, what you see is a structural relationship for which there is not divisions, and there are great.
By the way, here's a hint that the answer to that is no, because the answer to that could be yes, and he's not saying yes. So let's see how he tap dances around this.
Great concerns about the individual privacy and issues of data between TikTok and the Communist Chinese Party. But what you have even more importantly here is that this is a propaganda tool. These algorithms, these influencing through social apps, being in the hands of a self-declared adversary of the United States, one that has banned TikTok, banned Twitter, banned Twitter, banned Facebook, and banned YouTube, understands the use of these tools to be able to manipulate a society. And that certainly is one of the greatest concerns that we have.
So obviously the answer to her question is a big fat no.
Yeah, and he's admitting that actually this really is about the content that's on TikTok.
Right.
And how the U.S. can't control it, and that's allowing young people to be critical of countries like Israel,
right.
Which is what they're concerned about. If not for October 7th, well, actually, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say if not for October 7th, I don't think we'd be seeing this TikTok ban. But actually, I'm sure we would see it regardless. But certainly,
it's probably maybe not with as much gusto.
Yeah, that certainly accelerated the drive to want to ban TikTok because they can't control what is being put on there, so therefore it has to go.
Also, under Trump right now, like all of TikTok's data goes to Texas, where like this company called Oracle manages it.
That's right. Yeah.
But you know what? Part of me hopes that they ban TikTok for selfish reasons because I don't want to have to be on another platform.
Well,
I jest obviously, but it's enough with Twitter, Instagram, Facebook.
Yeah.
Feel a lot of pressure. Can we watch one more really short clip?
Yeah, sure. Which one?
Kara Swisher.
Kara Swisher. Okay, sure.
Just because it's interesting. The language used here is fascinating.
Okay, so this is Kara Swisher, a tech journalist. Positions herself kind of as a critic of the tech industry, but she is a supporter of this TikTok ban.
And listen to why.
You use TikTok, but only on a burner phone. In other words, you don't trust that you could carry it on a phone with you into private spaces and not be spied on?
Look, Margaret, I don't trust any of them, but I particularly don't trust a Chinese-owned company. That's all. I had it on a burner phone. I wrote a column in the New York Times about 4 or 5 years ago about it. I think it's an exciting app. I think it's a broadcast network. It's obviously entertainment, and it does it really well. I just feel like every Chinese company I've covered has had the tentacles of the Chinese Communist Party involved in it, whether they like it or not.
That's all I want to show. The tentacles. It's Arnaud Bertrand, who's great on Twitter. I think his handle is just Arnaud, like just the RNAOUD Bertrand. But he did a really great thread about all these anti-Semitic tropes that are used against the Chinese, because there's a lot of overlap between like xenophobic and anti-Semitic tropes. And of course, Greta Thunberg got into huge trouble just for having a plushy octopus in the background in one of her photos, which she had no idea that was about, that had any anti-Semitic connotations. But it's just such an old school, it goes back to like the 1800s. Whenever you're trying to vilify people, you talk about the tentacles.
Yeah. And she's saying like she doesn't trust Chinese companies, but so the implication there is that like she does accept US companies who have been caught, spying. And again, if it's, domestic companies that work with our government, the surveillance concern there is a lot more, is greater, I think, because this is our own government, and they have the authority to deploy their spying techniques with consequences. Like,
right.
To me, that's more of an immediate concern than a foreign company. But anyway, but regardless, like,
she does say that she doesn't trust any of them, but the ones that she mistrusts the most are the Chinese because the tentacles. The tentacles.
All right. Well, we come to the end of the show, right? I think that's I think we've covered it all. So much more to get to, but yeah. Well, listen, we heard before some useful idiots econ corner where we talked about economics and free trade policy. But now we're going to turn to useful idiots kids books corner.
Yes, because you guys have been asking about that. You've been clamoring and demanding it. Yeah.
And promote a very exciting new book that's coming out very soon by friend of the show, Karina Nicole Gonzalez. People might remember she wrote the book The Kochis Still Sing, which is a lovely book about a family in Puerto Rico recovering from Hurricane Maria. That's this. And you interviewed her, Katie.
I did. Yeah. It was a great discussion. Yeah.
And now, very excitingly, she has a new book coming out, which is called Churro Stand. It's basically a tribute to immigrant street vendors in New York City. And it comes out next month in April. And we're going to promote it on this show. And a link to pre-order it if you have a child in your life who you think might benefit from a wonderful book, because it's really beautiful, just as the last one was. The link is in the description.
And she's collaborating with the same artist she did last time.
Yes, Crystal Quiles is the same illustrator. And they won for their first book, The Cookie Still Thing. They won the very prestigious Belpré Children's Book Award, which honors representation of Latino culture in children's books. They won that for The Cookie Still Sing. So Churro Stand, it's available for pre-order now. If you love kids books, highly recommend it.
If you love churros, who doesn't love churros?
If you love churros, yes, and that's one of the lines in the book is everybody loves churros.
Oh,
so,
yeah. There you go.
So the link for that is in the show description.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much, guys, and we will see you next week.
Yes, because we're off for the rest of the week, but we'll be releasing the full interview we did recently with John Mearsheimer, which is a great interview.
Yeah.
And it's good if you haven't seen the full thing. And we'll see you next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.